This week, we welcome Ben 10. He's the team lead and of defense and countermeasures at Trusted Sec. We're going to talk about purple teaming and avoiding detection. In the security news, Zoom's remote code vulnerability is affecting over 700,000 companies. Wait, no one? I've been out of the office. No one told me. I guess I should have patched. How YouTube? I did this morning. My computer. I did apply all the updates. How YouTube is trying to ban hacking videos, which makes me want to throw up in my mouth a little bit. 1 terabyte of police body cams footage is available online, and how the U.S. Cyber Command warns of an Outlook flaw exploited by Iranian hackers. In our final segment, we air a pre-recorded interview with someone's name that I was not prompt on how to pronounce, Reinhard Hochreiser. He's the CMO at Jumio, I think is how you pronounce that. Jumio? Is it Jumio? Jumio, to discuss today's state of security demands and the need for biometric authentication. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Effectively securing your organization and its reputation requires a smarter approach. To maximize efficiency and minimize risk, security experts turn to LogRhythm, the only leading solution built solely for security teams by a security team committed to your success. With next-gen SIEM, user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic and behavior analysis, security automation and orchestration, and compliance, LogRhythm provides security made smarter. Is your IT team ready to face the next implementation or upgrade? Do you have a pool of talented team members who are trained and ready to support your organization's growth? The right IT skills development platform can get you past the IT skills gap. With training content that's so engaging, some even call it binge-worthy learning, your team will watch and learn more with IT Pro TV. Get a free team trial of IT Pro TV today. Visit securityweekly.com/IT Pro TV. Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIEM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/securityweekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today.
But first, welcome to Paul's Security Weekly, and let me introduce you to our host. To my right, a man who believes that bad things come in threes, so he apologizes if he gets any on you, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. It's number 611, recorded on July 11th, 2019, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Here with me, thankfully, some of my friends are with me, and I need to be around my friends after this week, believe me. To my left, Mr. Larry Pesce. Very welcome.
Good to be here.
Yes,
good to be here.
Nice to have you. Sharing some bourbon.
Yeah.
What is it? So Dave Kennedy always told me this was the best value in bourbon. What is it called? And I always blank on the name, and I can't see it because the bottle's turned.
Is it Old Overholt?
No, it's that one right down there.
Michter's.
Michter's. Whenever someone asks Dave about bourbon, he's like, go get a bottle of Michter's. It's not expensive. And what do you guys think? Really,
it's good stuff.
It's really good, right? And it's not expensive at all. It's the best value.
It's on the bottom shelf right now.
Well,
I mean,
we can put it up top.
And I've been drinking Old Meaty or something like that. So
Dr. Doug White is here. I miss Dr. Doug White.
Yeah, I missed everybody. I haven't been here in like a couple of weeks.
Because you were in Poland. And
I was
stuff.
in Poland.
Thank you for the cigars, by the way.
You're welcome.
Hopefully that cigar I gave you is really
It's
really
very
good.
nice. Yes, it's very good.
Fellow Armenian Paul Gamarian made that cigar.
Well, it's a very nice cigar. So I'm
Fantastic.
very pleased to have it, and so glad to be back.
Awesome. Patrick Laverty is here, sporting the new Security Weekly hats.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm all excited because I got the old DEF CON shirt. And where can people get one of these hats, Paul?
You got to come to DEF CON, and you got to be in the vendor area.
Go to DEF CON.
They just came in yesterday, I want to say
No, literally. I saw her say, yeah, I think it was
it
yesterday.
was yesterday they came in. So this is like the first time
Yeah.
anyone is ever adorned
I've
or
ever
seen
seen one.
these hats.
What makes them really cool, I think, is the fact that it even says Security Weekly all inside. It's got Security Weekly in the back. You guys went all out on these things.
We did. It was a very interesting design process, and I had never really seen hats quite like this, like the unique kind of characteristics about them. So I was excited when they came in, and I'm excited to be wearing it and show our fans. And you can get one of these at DEF CON.
I know. Aaron and I are going to be at the booth selling them.
Yes, I think I said, of course, now when I say it on the air, we'll have to honor it, that if you want to buy a Hack Naked t-shirt and a hat, you just got to give us $20, and you can own a shirt and a hat. So
And there it
basically,
is.
That's
there
a
it
pretty
is.
good deal.
What are you gonna
We
do?
want you to wear the stuff. We want you to give the stuff to those that you might think might appreciate it. So,
Cheapest hat and T-shirt combo at DEF CON.
right?
And it's really all you need in Vegas. It's just the hat and the T-shirt, and you're
Right.
good to go.
as long as the t-shirt's somewhat long enough.
or
you know
optional.
what? I'm
It's
not
Vegas.
going to go there.
We don't
On
judge.
the lines
Don't
remotely,
judge.
Mr. Joff Thayer is here with us with a super secret science experiment under that sheet in the back. I don't want to know, or do I? I don't know. You know what? Don't tell me.
That's right. Let's not talk about the science experiment in the back, but yes, I am here. It's Thursday, and I have missed you, Paul. Man,
I missed you. I missed you too.
Yeah,
Maybe the top of the next segment, if I'm still, I may have to run because my wife broke her ankle, and my dad passed away all in the same week, as many of you know. If
been
you
crazy,
follow,
right?
it's been a crazy week. But so she's still home, obviously with everything that's going on in my house, with a severely broken ankle that required surgery. So that's why everyone else is here ready to cover in case I got to run. Because I may have to, because she might
and
actually
please
lose it.
don't run, walk.
Yeah,
because you know
both of us being down
No,
is
yeah.
really bad.
your story kind of reminded me of, and I won't mention her by name, but one of the SANS staff in Europe this year while I was there. On the very first day she was there, I think she had a bit of a late night and got into one of those old hotel tubs, and those old hotel tubs in Europe are kind of high, and did the same thing, totally fell over and busted her ankle just horribly. So it's not an injury that you want. It's no fun.
Very painful.
So,
But Joff can grow you a new one under that cloth.
Under the sheet, he's
It's
yes.
alien
right.
genetic material.
My alien science experiment. In fact, I've got so many various and sundry science experiments happening back here. I mean, anything could happen at any moment is what it comes
Speaking
down.
of alien science experiments, Lee Neely is here with us. He works at
Happy
a
to
lab
be here.
somewhere that I think probably has many of those experiments, and it looks like you're still maybe at that place
got a
where
few
you work,
cooking there.
Lee.
Yes, I am at the nuclear weapons lab in Livermore. We've done lots of science experiments. Once upon a time, to study radiation, we had cows with windows in the side of them, so we could see how their insides were working. It was really weird.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. I love all that stuff, though.
Yeah.
I love the
awesome.
science experiments and all that kind of stuff. So
I
Cows
thought
with
I
windows.
heard,
I wonder how much
I
the
thought
cows
I
liked
heard
it.
Lee say cows. Did he say cows?
Yes,
Yes.
With
A
windows.
cow with a-
with windows.
With a plexiglass window on the side.
yeah.
Yes, indeed.
Plexiglass. Yeah, I was going to say Windows XP, Windows 95.
I think it was Windows for work groups, but it's
This was
okay.
3.1 days.
Activate cow now.
Windows 1.0. Here we go.
You're going to have to
It
reboot
has-
your cow.
when it
had-
blue screens, does it make blue milk? Is that like a thing?
That's right.
Oh.
I was gonna say,
That's how they get it.
That's how they get the blue milk.
From the blue screen
Unlike
cows.
Galaxy said you'd want to drink that blue milk.
oh, and what happens when you DLL inject that cow?
He's going back
There's
to
a
his
whole anyway. We're
These are
going
his
to move
Australian
on.
days
Security
here.
Weekly is going to be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta, Georgia, October 10th through the 11th. EC Council is offering our listeners a 15% off discount to sit in for any of their boot camp courses or workshops. You can visit securityweekly.com/Hacker Halted. Ben 10's here with us. He's been working in technology and development for over 20 years. I don't think you're old enough to be working. Were you like 11 when you started working? And
Yeah,
11,
last year.
I'm,
Last year.
I have to
Yeah,
say,
he was 11 last year.
Yeah,
I do
last
have to
year.
say,
So,
though,
like,
our
you know,
latest
I
developer
started.
is
I started in the womb.
There you
know,
go.
like
There
you
you
know,
go.
they have the USB ports. They have cows with windows, but my mom had a USB port. So it worked out
Wow.
well.
Our developer's 15, so I mean, nothing against you, and he's doing swimmingly.
No,
Working.
I'm almost 40 years old, so it's like a few months and I'll be 40.
Well,
so.
Ben, good to that's great because you don't look a day over 12.
I know, I really don't. That's
No,
the funny
like
thing is,
legit,
I
that's a
really
blessing,
don't.
dude. Like that's
Yeah.
awesome. I mean, you must
You
get
must
carded
get
a lot,
carded
and
like
that must suck.
crazy.
But
The worst
I mean,
part
the-
is shopping for clothes because not only am I just small, like I'm thin, so I actually have to go to the kids section. So here I am,
Ah.
a 40-year-old dude, walking around holding shorts up against me, like kids' shorts. I'm holding them up against me,
Awkward.
and the moms are like,
Yeah, and the shopping assistants are coming up to you and going, "Is your mother here?"
yeah.
So,
So-
well,
Oh.
don't,
I was
don't worry, Ben.
I was
Don't worry,
at a model rocket event, and I was there with my two boys, and he was over with another family that didn't know us, and they were getting. I don't know if you know model rockets, but it starts at AA and then moves all the way up through the alphabet. Well, they were getting ready to launch a K rocket, which is huge, and so I'm like, "Hey, come over," and they're like, "Hey, your brother's calling you." No, that's my son.
Oh.
Thanks.
That's awesome. Well, at least you've
Dude.
embraced it. You know, I mean, you gotta embrace it, and
It's all
yeah.
good.
and just think, next year when you're 41, you'll grow a chest hair. I mean, it's
But I got to warn you, Ben 9 looks like Jack Daniels, so it was
That's
Yeah,
true.
Yeah.
Well,
comes on fast.
What I
Yes,
tell my
it's-
kids, a lot of the lessons they learn are from Star Wars, and of course, Master Yoda said, "Size matters not." Right?
That's true.
That's right.
That's
A
true.
lot of good lessons from
That's-
Star Wars.
that's not
it.
what she
That's
said.
it.
and give Ben 2 more years, he'll look just like Master Yoda. So
I'm growing down as I get through there. Like, like everyone shrinks as I get older. I'm like, I really don't have much room to shrink here. Like when I'm at the airport and like I want a magazine, it's on the top shelf, and I actually have to ask somebody to help me get the magazine off the top shelf. Like,
And when you sit
Yeah.
in the emergency exit row, son,
Yeah, I sit in the
son, you have to be
emergency exit
15
row.
years old to sit here.
yeah, I've gotten that, and then I've even had I dropped off a rental car and got on a bus, and the bus driver to take us to the airport, he was like, "Do you need me to call ahead and have one of the flight attendants come and help you?" I'm like, "No."
Is she
good.
cute? Is she cute? I mean,
You can make it work, right?
Yeah.
So,
Hey,
so Ben,
so-
remember you have to protect that picture painting in the attic. Don't let anybody see it, or the gig's up.
That's
There you
true,
go.
that's true.
So for more Ben 10 roasting, you can go to trustedsec.com/security weekly, and you can leave your roast for Ben there.
I'll take them all because I'll probably put them into a talk or something like that. So I would do that at DerbyCon. They would do a Photoshop contest of me, and my favorite one was where they oh my goodness, my brain's Vladimir Putin was holding up a little baby and photoshopped my face as the baby. So
to scale. Yeah.
So to scale, yes.
Yeah,
They didn't really have to shrink it too much.
Wow.
So the truth about all the roasting is, of course, we're all just completely envious, right?
Totally.
Yeah, because
Very-
like we look
very
old and
look-
Ben doesn't. That's the joke is on us. Like
The problem is, it's like when I'm actually old enough to like get senior discounts, they're gonna be like, no, you can't have
you're
10% off, and like
You know
I'm
what,
never
though,
gonna get
dude?
AARP.
Better to be that
It's just
way.
Never gonna happen.
and look young. So, what are we talking about today?
Well,
Other than poor Ben, like roasting poor Ben.
I think the first
Purple
one.
teaming?
I take it's all good.
Yeah, I think the first one is Ben. Tell us how you got your start in information security.
So that's a great question. I started honestly when I was 13, writing computer software. I found out that I could tell a computer what to do, so I started it, and then I immediately went into viruses. So we wrote a bunch of viruses, me and my friend, because that was the obvious next step. And so did that, got into IT, was doing development, and got to the point of where I was a vice president of information systems at a corporation, and we had a physical break-in, and this was back, well before like HIPAA and all this other stuff. And so we had a physical break-in and stole a couple of computers, but I had already had like TrueCrypt when it was popular back then. I already had them on there, so it wasn't a big deal. But we brought in a forensics company, and they did a bunch of forensic stuff, which I had never seen before. And so I shoulder surfed him and then learned everything and tried to find a conference that I could go to. And that was actually the first year of DerbyCon. and I knew nobody. I didn't know
wow.
anybody or anything, and even went up to Dave Kennedy, and I had no idea who he was. And I'm like, "Do you know who's actually running this?" And he's like, "Yeah, hi, I'm Dave. I'm Dave Kennedy." And I'm like, "Who?" And he's like, "Peter Set," and I'm like, "I don't know what that is." So it was a weird and awkward first impression with Dave Kennedy. So then the following years, I just started volunteering. Really, I didn't know much. So I volunteered at B-Side Chicago, did some work with the B-Sides multi-cities Capture the Flag, volunteered at DerbyCon, and just worked and then just, tried to learn as much as I could. And then eventually got to do some penetration testing and vulnerability management with a company up in Michigan. And then Dave brought me over about 4 years ago. So I've been doing that ever since.
And in those 4 years, now you're lead for defense and countermeasures?
Yep. So I'm now the lead for our defense and countermeasures. That kind of came from, I started as just a, internal, external pen tester, web app type of stuff. And this was before like MITRE and everything else came out, but we wanted to offer something that was for both sides. I came from defensive world. I spent 13 years as a defender, and I knew what the defense looks like, and I learned a lot of the offense. But I realized that the two were always fighting against each other, and it was always an us versus them. When the pen tester comes in, he basically calls your baby ugly, and then they get upset, and then they're fighting, and that's not really helping anybody. And so, working with Dave and Martin, we decided to come up with this purple team, and that term's been thrown around. But what we wanted it was a real one, where you actually have red in the room, blue in the room, and it's not so much us versus them. It's like, okay, I ran this attack. Can you see it? And then if you can't, how do you write the detection for it? And so we kind of built an entire thing off of, that whole offering. And then so now it's become so popular that they needed us to have a full team for it. So they made me the team lead for defense and countermeasures. I'm still doing pen testing and I still break into stuff, but my primary focus is making sure that piece is up to date and new attacks are added and new detections are added. The whole cat and mouse game.
Great. So when you're talking purple team, is it when lots of people in the industry throw that purple team thing around, and is the purple team training? Is it an assessment? Is it a pen test?
Yes.
Is it a collaborative effort? Is it all of the above? Are there different flavors?
So it's really all of the above. And the thing is, it's not a pen test. And that's the one thing that I clarify. We're not going to go in. We're not following PTES. We're not following some methodology. It's really DV autopone is really what we're doing. We throw everything at it all at the same time. And we're like, what sticks? What can you see? What can't you see? And then we work through, the different attacks that were done. And we're like, okay, we want to see this lateral credential spray. We want to see this weak credential harvest. We want to see this Kerberos SPN query. We want to see the fact that you're doing Kerberos token authentication bypass. Like, we want to see all of these different things. And so it's training and education. And oftentimes we'll have it to where they can see both the attacker screen as well as the screen for their SIM. And we can this is what this attack looks like. This is what an attacker will do. And we have, for the initial part, we have 45 different attacks that use 0 exploits. So fully patched systems, it doesn't really make much of a difference. If I'm a local user or if I've dropped a box or I spearfish you, that initial vector doesn't really matter because I really don't care how you got in. You got in. Right. I more care about what you do after you get in. And so we build a lot of that training, I guess you could say, off of, okay, I'm in, you hired me as, junior intern because I look the part. And so now I'm on and you've given me credentials. Understand what I could do with a set of basic user credentials. And this is the way that I would do it. So we build detections all along those attack paths to try and identify some of that behavior.
Now, right. Ben, the way I think of it, I've been doing a lot of software development lately that really has very little to do with security, and I'm going to implement a lot of security sub-projects into what I'm doing and share them with them on the show. But to get to that point, I have to do a lot of traditional software development. When I think of purple teaming, I think of it as almost like the developer's unit testing is merging with to use another development term, right? The QA teams, QA testing, and we're working together to conduct tests, to measure those tests, to look at the outcome of those tests, to make improvements and continue that process. But taking that outside of the setting of software and putting that in the setting of testing your infrastructure, right? Does that really,
absolutely.
for you, kind of help, define what we're talking about with Purple Team?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was a developer first and foremost before I was IT. So that, you're definitely speaking my language, and that's it right there. And what's amazing to see is when you get both teams in the room and everyone gets to learn from each other, because if you're always red and that's all you do and you always do red, you don't necessarily know what defense is doing. And in the same perspective, if you're always doing defense and you're not actually learning what red's doing, then you're not really understanding the attacker mentality of what they're trying to accomplish, because there's one thing to do like patch management and bottle things up and whatever, but the business still has to business. And so what we want the blue team to understand is, if I'm an attacker, I'm not going to run a Vom scan right out the door. I'm not going to spray MS17010. I'm not going to do these types of things. And so we do this as an education piece. And what's amazing to see is the blue team finally understand, okay, I may not fully understand what Kerberos query is doing, but now I understand what the attacker is trying to do with that, and now I understand what this detection actually means. And it's a really neat experience for both teams.
What I find interesting in testing software that I had not really done in a long time was writing unit tests and how that involved. And I think that really is a great parallel into purple teaming, right? So when I have this application that I'm writing, I saw examples of, like, when you do unit tests, if you're doing, let's say, object-oriented style programming, basically when you write your unit tests, like, I always thought of those as a red teamer, right? Because that was my mentality. Like, it's an external thing. I'm going to access the web app. I'm going to fuzz stuff. What I had never really considered and built into the process was, well, hey, when I'm writing code, I can make instances of objects and do that in a unit testing fashion. In other words, when I want to test how I create a new user, sure, I could write some fuzzing test that tried all kinds of stuff as SQL injection and cross-site scripting, but before I do that, I want to, inside of my code, just make a new user object and then test all kinds of different scenarios inside my code. And I want to run those every time I make a code change. I want to run those. I want to create a new user inside of my own system and see where it fails, right? And then once I fix all those bugs, when I put it out there, just by nature, it ends up being more resilient. And I really feel like purple teaming is
the same
sort of thing. I want to take what I've built, right? I want to go to the inside. I want to say, yeah, go create these new attacks like on the inside and just run through a bunch of them and tell me where I failed, fix my stuff, so that when an attacker has an external view of that, it's a lot more resilient. I mean, it's essentially the crux of what we're talking about.
There's been, down through history, there's been a lot of instances of this in programming. It wasn't called purple teaming, but they did the same thing as they were trying to figure out, because originally there was one person sitting there coding, and they often didn't have the right perspective on how the code developed or how it was going to be used or implemented. And people realized that it was really interesting to have, and I have different feelings about different things, being one of those lone solo programmers, but, bringing HR or a user group or whatever to the table while people were developing code diagrams ended up being pretty useful, because programmers didn't think about their code the way users thought about their code.
Right.
And that's the same kind of concept.
The process.
Yeah, because the users are sitting there going, why would you do this? And you're like, I don't know, it's just the way everybody does it.
And even in software context, right, like user acceptance testing, I think is a huge a huge component that is often missed when we go into DevOps and we're developing so fast. We forget that, like, hey, let the user test the stuff and like see what they find, because I've been developing in software since I was 7, right? And like, you just can't think of every scenario about how the user is going to use it. They have to be involved.
And programmers are just as bad about this. Ben 10 said, like I said, your baby's ugly. And programmers are the same way. When somebody comes in and goes, this is the stupidest way to do this imaginable. Like, why do I need to do these 15 keystrokes to do a common task? And the programmers are always like, because that's the way I coded it.
Right.
That's right.
And, you know, I was in that presentation meeting once, and the guy literally said that. He's because I coded it like that. Do it. You know, and you're like, okay, we'll not buy your product, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the same problem. You know, and
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was hoping to ask Ben a sequential question.
Do it.
Purple teaming. We do this in various incantations as well at Black Hills. But the question I have for you is, does purple teaming always start up sequentially as if it is a red team and then kind of move towards purple in your experience?
So we did not design them that way, and we did it intentionally. A true red team is going to be low and slow. You know, we're going to do everything we can to avoid detection. We're going to impersonate somebody. We're going to the point is to try and avoid all detections altogether. And that red team is more for that initial vector, right? So when you're doing the red team, it's if it's on a spearfish, if it's a phishing campaign, you're crafting 1 to maybe 5 emails on a true red that you're specifically targeting. You're spending weeks, if not months, of research on it. And then like if they get in, you may only have a single attack path that were successful with, because they spent most of all their time on doing the research and developing the campaign or developing the exploit, or even building a new electronic component to bypass the security system.
Yep.
So you may only get a single attack path with that scenario. So that would be okay, and you could definitely build detections around that. But the point of our purples is not necessarily that it's a red team and then a blue team. It's red and blue at the same time. And so that's part of the reason that I kind of said that, our red team is more of a DB autopone. We're going to launch 15 of these different attacks all at the same time, and we're going to see what sticks and what doesn't. Right. And so it's more of just
and then more importantly
running it all at the same time.
And then what sticks and what doesn't, and which ones did you detect and which ones you didn't, and now let's go fix the problem together.
Yeah, and that's it, exactly. And even if we've done an engagement like a purple team for a company, we'll come back the next year and we'll rerun those again, because as everyone knows, like you make as Paul was saying earlier, you make a change to code, you want to rerun those unit tests. You want to rerun that purple team, because you guys could have implemented something that completely broke the detection, or made a misconfiguration. I saw one time where they had all of their Cisco ICE rules set up, and it was a NAC solution, and they had all of the rules set up, and everything was great. And I come in and I bypass the NAC, and they're like, "Wait, I don't understand. You couldn't do it last year." I'm like, "I don't know. I just did." Only to find out that the rules didn't transfer completely over to a different model of the Cisco NAC solution that they had. Like it was, Ben, I think some of that was just slightly off, and I was able to bypass it this time, whereas last year I wasn't.
And Ben, I think regression testing is something that needs to step outside of that traditional software developer mindset. And I think those of us that have that developer mindset are mindful of that as we go through our IT careers. Like whatever we are implementing, we get that concept of regression testing. In other words, for those that may not be familiar, let me try and define it, right? Like I've written a whole bunch of software and I want to fix a bug or implement a new feature or change the code in any way. And I do that. It was ingrained in my DNA that because I had great mentors as I was a software developer, that they said, look, anytime you make a change, how do you test it? Because how do you know how that or if that impacted some functionality in the application, right?
That's right.
As infrastructure becomes more like software and code, it's so much more important now that we think of regression testing. And that is, as Ben's describing, anytime we make a change to any kind of security control, we have to regression test and say, how does that impact every other scenario, every other piece of, basically regression testing is more about functionality than other kinds of scenarios. How does that impact functionality? When I change this piece of code, however innocuous it might be in the notification system for your software, but if I make that change there, hey, if it dies there, we just ran into a situation today where thankfully notifications were at the end of the publishing process, but if that breaks, then everything stops. Now, fortunately for us, in this case, it was at the end, but what if there were notifications, which you as a developer may think are whatever, innocuous. However, if you crash at a notification and everything stops and you don't do something after that, it could be bad. Regression testing needs to make sure that every change does not negatively impact any functionality. Does that?
No, I think that's
summarize
exactly
it. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I was sort of thinking around the branding aspect because we do a similar thing at Black Hills, but we just don't call it the same thing. You could call it a purple team, but ultimately, I think the real thing that comes out is a purple team is a collaborative exercise, and it's kind of a scientific experiment as well. You're deliberately testing controls, and you can. The nice part about it, if you have a solid methodology, which I'm absolutely sure Trusted Sec does, is that you can reiterate that methodology year on year and get the customer kind of an improvement measure, which is really a useful thing to be able to do. Now, of course, that's notwithstanding that techniques are going to change. There's going to be advances in the information security industry in the ways that we can potentially break into things and exploit things. Those have to be accommodated for, but it does give our customers a really good measurable and something that they can map back to their metrics for success, which I think is a really critically important thing, because anytime we can measure in the industry is a good time. I mean, it gives very constructive feedback back to the C-level, back to the board. It's really important stuff.
Lee, it looks like you have a question there, but I want to jump right in on something that Joff said there. In that the whole testing environment is an evolution. So Ben, when you guys are in working with some of your customers and you do the 45 attacks all at the same time, and you're at a point in the engagement where they can now detect all 45 attacks. What's next? And I see this as like the evolution of the red team, is that you need to evolve your tactics to be more silent, and then can we now go and become more silent and attempt to detect those as well?
Yeah, so that's a great thing about it, is that I do both. Obviously pen testing. I'm not nearly as fluent in the red team as some of our other guys. Like we have some really crazy red team guys, but I'll do red teams and I'll do the internals and everything else like that. And I've actually pen tested a company where I did a purple team, and so that's awkward, right? Because you want to be successful on both sides, but like if you're successful on the pen test after the purple team, then you're like, wait, did I mess one of these up?
Or was or am I better than I thought I was?
Yeah, like so like it's awkward. Yeah. But the evolution there is there are going to be some pieces that like when you go to the red team, if I'm on an environment, I'm going to, if I know that they've got a really good defense or anything else like that, I'm actually going to avoid a lot of the basic stuff like password spraying or lateral movements in the similar fashions, and I'm going to use a lot of stuff that's not necessarily as reliable or fast. I've actually been in an engagement where I had to handwrite using one of their in-house utilities, a new thing, and I actually basically compiled my own little thing within their environment to actually do some of the LDAP queries that I couldn't do because I didn't want to use the normal net user to dump all the users. I wanted to do something different. Now, the thing is that a lot of times we won't actually get through all 45 in a single engagement, just because that's a lot to do. It's a lot to go over. So it takes multiple engagements for us to actually get through a lot of these. But we do have some clients that are better than others. And so then what we do is we introduce some of the more obscure stuff, the stuff that actually gets into more network packet inspection and that type of thing. And then we look at, obviously a lot of this is going to be very Windows heavy out the door, but we do have, like we're going to go over and look at the Linux stuff now. We're going to look at the web services now. We're going to also go look at, if you have a Macs in your environment, there's a lot of Apple script stuff. And as you guys mentioned earlier, like with the Zoom, taking control of your camera and that type of stuff. So we would want to continue to look at the different operating systems and the different components that you have there. But when we look at some of the more advanced, C2 environments and that type of stuff, they're becoming much more harder to detect. But I read an article from Microsoft, and the guy put it very eloquently. You may be invisible, but you give some signs. Like if you're invisible and it's cold outside, you're still going to see your breath. You're still going to see footprints in the snow or whatever the case may be. Like you may be invisible, but you don't necessarily go without leaving a mark. And a lot of the stuff that we see when we develop a lot of this stuff, we do take into consideration, or like, if we're going to use this, what is the proper way of actually detecting it? Kerberos is a good example of one where, when it initially was released for querying the SPNs, there really wasn't a lot of reliable detection with that. Monitoring Kerberos logs is incredibly difficult. It's spammy, it's noisy, it's obnoxious. Most organizations don't even turn on that monitoring because there's so much of it, and their licensing doesn't allow it. So, at the beginning part, there was no real control for Kerberos. I mean, you could turn off Kerberos and the function, the business couldn't function anymore. So that would be okay, I guess. But, that was not necessarily an option. And so we really didn't have a fix. It wasn't until, a little bit later that I realized that there was a way to actually detect that Kerberos SPN query. But then, here we are now. Now we've got a Kerberos ticket authentication bypass, which is, it's not past the ticket. It's a different thing. Instead of it doing the ticket to LSAS, you actually spin up your own version of LSAS, and it sends it to you. So that way you control everything that's going on, and then you generate the ticket. So it's like a bypass of that. So it kind of defeats a lot of the detections that go with there. But there are still other ways of looking at, okay, well, this is going to be one of your indicators that this, control is on the place. So that's part of the reason that it's so important, to your point, Larry, of like, once you've learned it all, or once you've detected, everything that we have, like, what's next? Well, I mean, there's so much out there. Yeah. I mean, I don't know it all. And so there's always that, okay, well, now let's learn this attack, and what does this look like, and can we actually write a detection for it?
Lee, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. So one of the things I do a lot of here in my day job is we work on testing security significant changes to make sure that we haven't left the barn door open. And one of the questions I come up against, and I wanted your take on, is how do you know if you've tested enough versus too much, and when you're just kind of spitballing, which you're not going to find any more? I mean, does that make sense? How do you know what's good enough?
You know you left the barn door open when you feel the breeze.
Yeah.
Well, so to answer your question, is there ever, is you ever at a point where you're 100%? And the answer is no. You're always going to be testing. You're always, changes happen every year. I've worked with teams where, they had people leave their defensive team and new people came in. And I've had, some of these new people, delete the queries that I wrote for them. And I'd come back the next year and they had no detections of which we had last year. And I'm like, what happened? They're like, well, this rule wasn't generating any alerts, so we deleted it. I'm like, well, that actually means that's a good thing. That means that there's not a bad guy there. So, that type of thing. So there's always going to be that. I mean, we're human. We make changes. We make mistakes. So, even if you test the same thing, it's still going to be valuable. The thing about it is that when we look at some of this stuff, and I think what you may be alluding to is what I would call a whack-a-mole defense. And what ends up happening is that you get the news article, you see something that's out there, and immediately that becomes the new hot thing. And so everyone runs after that, and they whack it and try and get it resolved, and they're like, we've got to get eyes on this. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that that's where everyone's focus goes. A lot of times what ends up happening is that there's so much focus and so much resources applied to all the new hotness that they miss a lot of the basic stuff that even that new hotness would use. So let's MS-17010 is a great example, right? It's Eternal Blue. It's great. It's the new MS-08067. The fact of the matter is, even if I use Eternal Blue, once I'm on a box, still have to do the basic same stuff if I want to laterally move, unless I'm just going to be content on that one box. And so when we build a lot of our purple teams, we build it without that initial vector as being a limiter. We don't really care how you got in. We don't care if it was Eternal Blue. We don't care if you use Kerberos. We don't care if you are a valid user on our network and you legitimately should be on the network. We don't care. We just want to identify what that behavior looks like. And what that does is that allows us to not necessarily have every little thing covered. Yes, we may miss an initial vector or a 0 day that's out there, for sure. I mean, there's no question to that. No one can honestly say that they're ready for August past Tuesday. Like they can't because patches aren't here.
Right.
So, but we know that there are 0 days out there. And so we know that those 0 days are there because, I mean, it was even an article that Microsoft was working on 2 patches for 2 critical ones. So the point then is when we build these detections and the defensive piece, it's we're like, let's not focus so much on the individual vectors. Let's look at what happens after and see if we can identify that. Not to say we ignore the initial vector. It's just that our focus becomes, let's more look at, the fact that they're already in.
Yeah. So
Did that answer your question?
Yeah. So that was Lee's question, but I think what you're really saying is don't worry about so much in some of these cases about the initial vector because it's all just about the stupid users, anyways.
Yeah. Well, and I
see, you shouldn't have baited me like that. You shouldn't have baited me like that.
I absolutely hate that term. I really
I want to throw in. I just want to throw in.
There's no easier way to trigger me than to use that.
See, you shouldn't have baited me like that on the pre-setup call.
He's a master baiter.
I just want to throw in a comment though. Another way of saying I think what Ben was just saying is post-exploitation attacker behavior matters more than tools and techniques necessarily, because for too many years I think a lot of the defensive software, particularly, focused on particular tools, particular things that were being thrown down on the system, but ultimately, the behaviors are going to be the same. Once you get into a post-exploitation context, that attacker is going to try to get some sort of local and or domain privilege escalation. That attacker is going to try to laterally move in the environment. The attacker is going to try to exfiltrate data from that environment. And then that behavior is going to be a pattern that's going to repeat over and over and over again. And so if you focus your defenses on looking at the sort of behavioral approach, you're always going to be better off.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
Well, that also leads into what was behind the question is, how do you wind up asking the right question, checking the critical things without boiling the ocean? I'm not trying for 100%. I know there's no such thing, but when I've had somebody submit a significant security significant change to me. And when I ask them, well, how do you think we're going to test this to make sure it's done right? And they give me the null set back. That's not good. So having a mindset to approach it is a great coaching tool. So you can then, because I don't want to just tell them this is what we're going to do. I want them to think about how they might get exploited and to approach the problem. So that I'm trying to teach them to fish with an F, not a PH. So anyway, it was a really good answer. Thank you.
Awesome. And so Ben, that brings me to some of our other stuff about, going into a purple team and avoiding some of that detection and turns out you've made some tools and some of those types of things to help, one, detect and to avoid some detection, and lots of sort of follow on with some of those types of stuff. And I think one of the ones that I remember seeing you speak about at DerbyCon, if I remember correctly, was NPM.
NPS. Yeah,
NPS,
not
right.
PowerShell.
Yeah, not PowerShell.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay.
Sorry. I was doing NPM.
Okay.
I was doing NPM updates this morning, so that's why it stuck. So
yeah, that's okay. Yeah. So if you just replace NPM with NPS, it'll be so much faster.
Wait, what is NPM? NPM is Node Package Manager, right? Node.
Yes.
Node.js.
Yep.
And what is NPS?
Not PowerShell.
Is what PowerShell?
It's not PowerShell.
Not PowerShell.
PowerShell.
So this is the way this came about. I was on an engagement and I had access to a box, and to avoid a lot of the detections, I have a developer background, so PowerShell was really easy for me. So I would write everything within PowerShell, and I was using PowerShell to do Kerberos ticket stuff and lateral movement, obfuscation, exfiltration. I even wrote my horrible version of Nmap in the PowerShell, and so I'm like doing everything I can, going around there, and I update the client and what's going on, and they're like, oh, well, you shouldn't have had PowerShell on there. That was our mistake and everything else. I'm like, well, don't change anything now. Let me see how far I can go. And all of a sudden, the screen blinked, and I was like, what? And so then I try and launch PowerShell and said, this has been disabled by your system administrator. And I'm like, okay, so to demonstrate that it wasn't necessarily that what they did for the defense wasn't necessarily enough to stop me, I wrote not PowerShell, and I rebuilt all my tools in not PowerShell. And so then I just released the tool just to show PowerShell.exe doesn't actually stop you from using PowerShell.exe. It's a bunch of DLL libraries and everything else like that. So it was more of to demonstrate oftentimes, trying to go after a single binary doesn't necessarily mean that you've solved the problem.
So you just
and we see that in red teams.
Sorry, but you just renamed the binaries in the DLLs. It was still PowerShell, but it wasn't PowerShell.exe? Or did you write it in some other language that ran on top of Windows, or both?
Yeah, so in C# you can actually call the PowerShell DLL, and then you can create the environment and do everything within that and then pass controls to it. So that's really all I did. I think not PowerShell, maybe 30 lines of code, and that's about it.
So you basically wrote a loader for PowerShell.
That's it.
Yeah.
And that's all PowerShell.exe is anyway.
It's just a loader.
PowerShell.exe,
Right.
all it does is load those DLLs. It's really just the same exact thing as what I just did.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. So Ben, to one of the other questions that I asked earlier when we were chatting the other day, NPS would be one of those great things you could use in an environment where PowerShell is highly restricted. And my question to you was what do you do when you go into an environment where PowerShell is really restricted? And your response was,
I haven't really seen it yet.
Which is
I really haven't.
Yeah.
And that's actually not surprising.
Right.
If you look at Windows Server 2016 and Nano Server, you can't manage those without PowerShell. Now, does everyone in your organization need PowerShell? No, absolutely not. But it's one of those things where your defense shouldn't be no PowerShell. That's just not. It's not practical. It's not future ready. It's not wise. And with the latest versions of PowerShell, they actually put a lot of security controls baked into it, which is actually really nice.
Yeah, because Ben, it depends on how you use PowerShell, right?
Sure.
The way you, as Ben, might be using PowerShell is fundamentally very different from the way an administrator would use PowerShell. The better defensive that I've seen look at how PowerShell is being invoked, when it's being invoked, what it's calling, and going, that's anomalous, right?
That's it right there. Especially when PowerShell all of a sudden is dialing out to some internet resource or to a local box or loading certain functions or whatever. One of the things that we do is we look at also length of commands, the number of special characters. Daniel Bohannon wrote a great tool called Invoke Obfuscation, and it basically takes a simple PowerShell command and it just obfuscates it, makes it look like junk. So one of the things that we did was we noticed one of the obfuscation techniques adds a lot of commas to the command, and so we wrote a detection for both Windows commands and PowerShell that may have more than 10, 15 commas. And I actually called it chameleon.
Well, how do you even know? You're not even old enough to know about that song.
I got to add that to my 80s playlist. Every once in a while, I get into the 80s playlist, and I played a Tears for Fears, inspired, playlist.
Paul has a whole persona where he's got the hair from Flock of Seagulls and everything.
I'm very musically diverse.
He left it at home today, though.
Yeah, no, he didn't bring it.
The family doesn't appreciate the 80s playlists.
Our family would totally appreciate it because that's all we listen to.
I like it every once in a while. I think it's good. But in any case, but PowerShell aside, Ben, there's other techniques. If you didn't have PowerShell at all, right? I mean, there's ways to get Windows systems to interpret JavaScript, right? To interpret Python. Like there's other ways, right?
Yeah, and what we're actually finding is that we're looking and we're seeing like VB script is actually still pretty successful.
Right? Like the language doesn't matter. I guess that leaves defenders looking for behavior rather than an invocation of a specific language.
We used to do that on the mainframe a long time ago.
You say that a lot. This is a famous Doug quote.
Yeah, a long.
Back in the mainframe, we used to do this.
Right after we shoveled the coal into the mainframe to get it good and going and blew the steam whistle a couple of times.
And we had to enter 10, 20 hexadecimal codes to boot it
That's
up.
right. We had
liked it.
usernames made of hexadecimal machine language.
Punch cards.
Hey, you kids today don't know. But we did used to write a lot of
After you IPL'd, right?
I call them yes. I call them behavioral scripts that just literally watched for users who were typing, like you said, complex things, long things, and started to categorize users on the system because I wanted to put people on my shit list of people who shouldn't be doing certain things because most people did very similar
I would argue,
things.
Doug, that much of the security we're talking about in this context is about categorizing behavior.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep,
That's exactly what I'm saying. I mean, and we were doing that. I mean, like I say, I was trying to figure out who should I put on this list of users who really should be typing really simple things.
Sure.
And instead, here's somebody in marketing who suddenly types this big long string or they type some commands. They like, why is that person running that command? And then you knew they were somebody you might want to keep an eye on. And we actually started logging them more heavily.
Or there's someone that's taken over that persona.
Yep.
Like why is this user in marketing running a 50-line bash script for some
why
reason,
do they
right?
why
all
are they,
on one line,
or
right?
even just people that were modifying their bash shell, their equivalent of their bash shell code.
Right.
They were modifying. I'm like, why would they know how to do that and even be considering it? Because you saw people adding like paths to their their logon, and I'm like, why on earth would they know how to do this, and why would they be doing it? And just those kind of little basic hack things that people learned. And they became targeted users for us that we were watching because we knew that's the person who's going to be a risk. These other people are probably not going to do that. So I like that idea very much. The comma chameleon.
I think what Doug is actually trying to say is he is the original sys operator from hell.
That's right. It was based on me.
Bastard operator from hell.
I can
Bastard
attest to
operator
that.
from hell.
He is, Jeff.
But I'll tell you, like the database admins and those sys operators, especially the longbeards, you even look at their database wrong, they know about it. Like I could be all across the entire environment, have DA doing all this stuff. I just do one thing to like a mid-range or a database admin, and detections left and right, and it's because the dude knows what's supposed to happen on that computer.
What's interesting? I think that having sysadmins that really know their shit is one of the pillars of security.
Yep.
Regardless of the technology, regardless of the platform, you got sysadmins that know their shit. Dude, like security-wise, you're in a much better place.
And that was people who were thinking like hackers before there were hackers.
It's true.
It's exactly it. Yeah, and the problem is that they're not great people. And to be to be in that position, like it literally is George in the basement. I mean, that's
it literally takes like 20 years to get to that point to be that person, and experience-wise, to just know when.
Just to be clear, now I've been called a long beard and George in the basement.
We're really saying
we've called you a lot worse things, but not to your face.
But I appreciate those more.
Pedophile. See, I have to keep mine PG-13 because I'm not old enough for that yet.
Wow.
But do you think those experienced admins are also going to potentially make things unintentionally worse? Because they've made things so easy for themselves, where maybe they set UID somewhere.
Patrick, I'll take that in a slightly different direction because I like where you're going with it. In that, experienced admins and/or developers do have, I think, a vision and a purview into the systems that give them an advantage when it comes to security and detecting.
And this
hackers.
assumes they care about security.
True. Mm-hmm. The other edge of that sword is. They think they know the way, and they're not going to change, and they're going to introduce vulnerabilities because, I'm not going to use that new tool or that new tool. Like I know that this is the way, and oftentimes John Stratton has said the senior developers are the ones in this example, right, that introduce more vulnerabilities because they know the system. This is the way we've
They've
done
been
it.
doing it that way.
It's the way we'll always do it.
This works, and
Right.
there's some safeguards around it, and this is good. But they haven't considered the one or two different scenarios in their design and implementation that can lead to failure, right?
and-
But they will catch a whole bunch of evil hackers because they know the systems. But again, it's that double-edged
And one
sword.
other little piece, I agree with all that. And one other little piece I'll add to that too, though, is a lot of people like me were doing this before we even had a focus on what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And we were really just trying to keep everything running.
Yes.
Because we didn't have all these teams and tools and everything else. It was like, we just need a system to run. So by automating as much as possible, and that I think gets back to Patrick's point, it meant we did neglect things because we said, oh, if I always press this one script and I run it every day, I'm good and I don't have to worry about it anymore. And then
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
and you don't move forward because as things started to evolve, people are stuck on that. Oh, I always just hit this control function every morning.
I think experienced sysadmins have definitely evolved, but there's so many more variables thrown into the system.
That's what I mean.
Right? That you lose track
Well,
of
I mean, you
things.
still want the system to run. So if new stuff starts happening, you do something about it, but you didn't tend to have a lot of time to focus on. Let me think about how I could do better things. It was just kind of like I got to get this going.
But I think experienced developers and sysadmins have this one commonality that we don't trust anything the user gives us and anything the user does.
Yeah,
and
I
we
think
just-
it takes time to develop
And we
that.
just basically hate people.
I mean, that's part of it. That's part of it. It is. I can't disagree that that's part of it, right? But like even in design meetings, say with Mark, I'm like, I don't want you to have to worry about that when you use our software, right? Like I just want to set that for you because it's one less variable that you have to consider as a user. I just want to check everything around this particular condition. I want to set it for you, and I want to move forward. It's one less thing that you have to provide me that I have to worry about either a security or a failure condition, like a security vulnerability or a failure condition. I don't have to worry about that. I'm just going to, this is what it is. I'm going to check these different things. If things go wrong, I'm going to come back to you and say, you're screwed up, like go fix it and come back later when you know what to give me as far as input, right? But I think it's that mindset that makes our systems as a whole more resilient.
So
And that's essential. What we're talking about is resiliency, right? I mean, that's what Ben's talking about, doing
that is
purple
exactly
teaming and assessments is becoming more resilient. I don't think there's a lot of new lessons in terms of resiliency. We've learned a lot of these lessons. We just need to apply them to today's technology.
And another big piece is that most people don't even know what's going on in their environments. Like you look at the sysop and you do one thing, they're like, that is not normal. Well, they know that because they know what normal is.
Right.
You go to some of these shops and they're like, I'm like, do you have a identity management system? Like, yeah, we've got this, CyberArk, whatever. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, let's look and see and make sure that everyone's following it. And like, 20 of their domain admins are creating random users on individual workstations or whatever the case may be. I'm like, why are they doing that? Well, I don't know. I'm like, they shouldn't be doing that. They're like, no, they shouldn't. So then it's just that piece. Like they don't know what is going on.
I think identity and roles and privileges are something we need to work on in many different aspects. I think in the days of the mainframe and developing software, we've been made aware of that. I think when we get to things like I'm just implementing a bunch of Linux systems or Unix systems or Windows systems, we tend to lose sight of that and think that the platform will provide the rules that govern what users can do in various roles, and that's not the case. We need to define those and look for things that step outside of that, and I think we've lost sight of that, especially in an Active Directory environment that is way too trusting of everything that's in the environment, that the admins need to be very, very much more aware of the rules that govern what users can do, what different roles, whether it's a user or a service account, what that account can do.
Well, they sold a bill of goods to people that was called decentralized computing, where they said, you know what, you can get rid of Doug. He's a bastard, and you ought to get rid of him. And all the users went, hell yes, and they adopted decentralized computing, and then we've spent the next 40 years trying to get back to the mainframe.
That's really deep, Doug. That's actually one of the more,
that's exactly
one of the more insightful things that we've talked about in the show. And that is exactly right, Job. That sums it up nicely. It really does. Nailed it.
So in moving us along, now
that we just shattered the security model for every system being implemented today,
I think that there was something that really came up that was interesting that Ben and I talked about earlier this week, was that whole heuristics model of looking at user behavior. And while we were on the call, Ben had this crazy idea that all of a sudden just came up, like, all of our tools are written in English, and what happens when we maybe start writing our tools in another language? Like, maybe we do that. But do you see what I'm getting at? And Ben, did you get a chance to flesh any more of that out since we talked?
Yeah, so I actually did a couple tweets yesterday because I was like, well, what happens if I put the Korean keyboard on my computer and I type the characters for the word password, for the Korean word of password.
Right.
And so, like, what does that look like? And so like it was like DSAB or something like that.
Right.
And so then I was like, I wonder how many that happens. And we had talked, and there was an article or a tweet or something, or like everyone was like, why do I keep seeing like JPRB9 whatever showing up in all my password lists like over and over and over and over again? And it turned out that was the keyboard strokes for the Japanese word for password. And so then I was like, I wonder what that would look like. And so then I began to look at least from the Korean side, but also like looking at some of the other languages like Japanese, Chinese, and whatever, what that would look like. And so now I'm actually going through and looking through all of our password lists and seeing if maybe that's there. And that actually might not be a bad way to like keep your password as password, is do it in another language. I don't know.
I go.
Nice.
So, but now we start thinking about what if we start using those keyboards and so forth in something like PowerShell, so that those commands are now looking different, so that maybe we're avoiding some of that heuristics. And
like signatures and heuristics are not internationalized, right? Corey Thune from Gravell was, I don't know if he said this on air or not, but I get it when it comes to software. Like, making an internationalized version of your software is not an easy chore, right? And it's something that many of us that are maintaining software like have to deal with, right? And what are the security ramifications of using different languages to get around whatever detections we have? It's a very interesting idea. I like it because we haven't talked about it a lot in the show. So I think it's a very fascinating idea.
Ben and I were talking about avoiding detection the other day, and he's like, what if we use a different language? I'm like, I'm so asking you that. You better think about that.
so that is part of my thing series, is like, that's one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to run all of these commands, make sure that they can work and whatever, but see if I can like get around the detections.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll look horrible, like, because like, here I am helping the renegade, but like now the question is, how do we actually, what does that look like on the other side? And does it translate? And does every sim translate it well? Like if I send a bunch of, different language characters to my Splunk or whatever, is it going to translate well? And is it going to break anyone's regex? I know a lot of people have like these crazy regexes.
Is it going to break software in general? I mean, even in English, when we talk about the difference between ASCII and Unicode, anyone that's written code knows like that can be a real pain in the ass, animal, right? Yeah. It's a whole and as Joff, right, the difference between Python 2.7 and 3 handles that very differently, right?
That's exactly right. I was about to say that. I've actually got a talk on that I've been doing all year at SANS. And I probably will do it at Wild West Hacking Fest. I just had to think a minute, which talks about the idea of converting your Python 2 to Python 3 scripts, and it's all about Unicode.
It is.
I mean, that's the big deal
because they handle it very differently. Yeah. And most things have.
They don't even handle it at all in Python 2. That's the thing.
Yes,
Strings
that's my struggle. And it's hard when you start dealing with REST APIs and JSON, and there are functions to convert it to UTF-8, right, which make it very handy, but it's very different between the different Python versions and very different between what we're talking about in different language and character sets.
And
maybe I should do a quick text segment on that one night. But the simple thing to remember for folks is, if you're dealing with network and files, normally you're dealing with byte objects, and byte objects are cool and they do work perfectly well in Python 3. If you want them to be string objects, you can make them string objects. You just have to actually convert them to such.
To a character set that is standard across your code base, right?
Yeah, exactly. And UTF-8 is very common. It's the default in Python 3 for string coding. But there's a big difference there.
This reminds me to exactly some of the same stuff that Ben and I were talking about, like, changing the language for the use of our tools. Ben, you were saying you're learning some Spanish.
Yeah,
right? I'm trying to learn some Korean. Hence the Korean during during those I go. But now thinking about you were relating me a story about that you knew someone that was using a completely different off the wall language for interpreting to be able to interact with stuff, and like now you bring this whole UTF-8 thing into it, and like, well, maybe now all of our commands should be done via emoticons. Let me just smiley face that.
I think if we just changed everything to emojis or emoticons or whatever the case may be, like, I think that would just solve it. Like, just get rid of it.
No, I stripped that stuff out.
So do you strip that out of the detection of the commands that are running your sim?
Any user input, right, in certain applications like the one I'm working with, right, in Python 2.7 specifically, Joff, right, I have functions that remove anything that is not ASCII, right? Because when you enter, think about an application, right, you enter a name or a title or whatever, you really don't want anything that's not an ASCII character in there. Because that could be functional issues. It could be security issues. I strip it out.
But what if my name is really Poo Emoji?
You cannot interact with my application. You are not a host. You are not a host on Security Weekly.
Damn it!
Your name is blank. Your name is blank. In my code right now, your name would be blank.
Because you know what? This sounds like a fantastic fucking challenge that I should go legally change my name to like Poo Emoji. Either Unicode Snowman
you would
or
break so many applications, dude. Ours included. Your name would be blank. And then when I check, like if you're a host on the show, I check if your name is none in Python, right? None is a thing. And you'd be none, and you wouldn't be a host on the show anymore.
Right. Well, and you would just disappear.
You would disappear.
Be like, what the hell happened to Larry? And this comes back to the whole thing about one of the things that Eric Johansson did many years ago. And I met Eric at ShmooCon, and he was showing me all of these credit cards that he was able to get. And being a noob and an idiot at the time, I'm like, dude, they spelled your name wrong. They put 3-Rick. It's not E-R-I-C. It's 3-R-I-C. He's like, no, that's the point because that's my legal name. I changed it to that because putting a number in a field where they expect only characters fucking breaks everything.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, now we can...
but a number isn't... number is an ASCII character.
But it is, but so many
in
of the
my
things...
code, you'd be okay because it's an ASCII character.
But so many of the things that he was attempting to do with that, his official name is Eric, but it's... the first letter of his name is actually a number. And like if you go to sign up for a credit card, they expect alpha only.
A letter.
Alpha,
only.
Not numeric.
Right.
Alpha.
Like your name can't have a number in it, but his does.
He's the original Bobby Tables.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
And like,
also,
I like alpha numeric. That's cool.
Yeah.
Special like ASCII. That's cool.
That's it. I have to go call my lawyer and officially change my name to Pumoji.
But it's so interesting. Like, it depends on the developer, right?
Right.
Like, it really does depend on developer as to how they coded the system.
And if it's language friendly, you'd have to get away from that. I mean, if you're going to allow it to be used in China or something where you're typing in Unicode
That's a whole
characters.
different.
But I mean, as the world shrinks,
right.
If you want to really be a real developer that's producing code for the world, you're going to have to allow Unicode in those fields.
It's true.
You're not going to be able to restrict it to ASCII. It's just not going to work.
And in my there's a whole project that's going to take it from 2.7 to 3.
I mean,
right?
even just in Poland, it's not going to work because they have all kinds of characters that are not in that basic character set. So you have to go to Unicode.
This whole discussion actually reminds me of one of the phishing techniques that we use quite a lot, and I'm sure Ben's familiar with this, and that is Punicode for DNS. Yep. One of the favorite things that we've done quite a lot and probably still do is generate a Punicode version of a target's domain name that looks very, very similar. You put the little umlaut under the U or whatever. I'm probably doing this wrong. Or you make the O with a little dot below it or something like that. So turns out when you put that into a browser, the browser renders the Unicode just beautifully, and the domain name looks identical. And often it's the case in Outlook emails and so on that the URL looks identical. So phishing somebody and getting them to click on that becomes all of a sudden a whole lot more trivial. And of course, if you do something like clone like a Microsoft portal for authentication, ADFS or whatever, Bob's your uncle. Magically, you're collecting creds.
So change your name to Poomoji with umlauts over the O's would be.
Character encoding, I think, it plays into software design as well as security. I think it does. Something that we've not really talked about as much as I think we should, because so many times in our internal application, right, we run into issues copying and pasting. Unicode character gets introduced, and the software just crashes, right? Like, that scenario can be played out in so many different ways as we've described.
I call that code nationalism.
Come on, Doug. Go back to your fucking mainframe. I mean, seriously.
I thought it was George.
But what's interesting, it goes back to the mainframe in that when I was sniffing packets, I've described this on the show before, I'm like, this traffic's encrypted. And I had to do a lot of research. I'm like, I don't know if it's encrypted or what's going on. I'm like, oh, it's EBSIDIC.
It's EBSIDIC.
It's
Hell
EBSIDIC,
yes.
right?
No.
It's totally not encrypted, right? Like,
I'm an AS400 user, yes. And
that is what opened up my mind to the way you can encode different.
My son, you've experienced the AS400.
I had like an enlightenment moment. I'm like, yes, exactly. Oh, yeah. Just like I've told my children that this is really bad. My wife's doctor was Dr. Strange, right? That worked on her ankle.
This is just what you told the kids.
What I told the kids. And the 3-year-old totally buys it all, which is great. My wife's doctor was Dr. Strange, which, like, thinking about it, like, I really thought of Dr. Strange because she had to wait a long time before she had surgery. And he was, like, driving this really fancy sports car, right? And that when they did surgery on Mom's ankle, it was like Wolverine. So if she, like, clenches her toes, like, blades are going to come out of her foot. 3-year-old totally buys into that.
Sweet.
I tell you
like,
what.
Don't make Mom mad. She's going to kick you.
Right? And I'm like, if she kicks you, either blades are going to come out or you're going to go flying like 30 feet back. So all my kids are, like, very afraid of Mom.
See, I solved that in that I do karate with our 11-year-old and well, now the 6-year-old. And there's been a couple of occasions where the class is really small and she and I are the only black belts in class, and then I have to spar with her.
Yeah, there you go.
And I'm allowed to punch her.
You better behave this week, or
even better. Like, do you want me to go easy on you? Well, you better behave this week because we're coming back here next week.
My question is, Paul, have you actually found the blades that you can install into her cast? Because it would be totally cool if you could bring it to reality.
Right. I've got the images. I kind of want to modify them in Photoshop and show my kids, like, see these? Those are blades. Don't mess with them.
Mod the X-ray and show them.
Amazon.
See, here's the adamantine. Yeah, it's right there.
Amazon. Like, you got to find that snicked. You got to find them so you can, like, tuck them under the cast after she starts getting better.
Somewhere.
What was awesome, though, was I told my kids about, they were like, who's Wolverine? I'm like, X-Men guys? I'm like, And they're like, what? So I explained the whole thing. They're like, I'm like, and it's a movie. And that's all I had to say. And they were like, Dad, can we watch the Wolverine movie? I'm like, yeah. Like original X-Men. So they're watching the original X-Men with Wolverine and totally engrossed. And they're like, Dad, this is awesome. I'm like, I know, right? Like I've bred my own like nerd children. They get into all this stuff with me that is just like the greatest joy in life. That I'm like, yes. We can nerd out on X-Men now.
Speaking of nerd children, Ben.
Ben, you're up for 5 questions, my friend. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I'm ready.
All
Let's do
right.
it.
Ben, 3 words to describe yourself.
Small, young, and short.
I'm so turned. I'm so turned on right now.
Skywalker,
Wait,
we get
what?
it. If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Fruit Loops.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
No, I'm really not this young.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
Second.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Short or tall?
Stephen Hawkins and Richard Dean Anderson.
Oh.
Ben 10, thank you so much for appearing on Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you. You can go to trustedsec.com/Security Weekly. That is the URL. Ben, thank you so much for
thanks
joining
guys
us
for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thanks, Ben. Thanks for the inspiration of that language thing.
It was awesome.
We may need to talk later on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, hopefully we'll get some cool research done on it for both red and blue.
Hell yeah.
I like it. Yeah.
All right.
And with that, we'll take a short break. Come back with the security news for this week. Stay tuned.